honored this morning to have with us Elaine Miller-Karas. She is the Director of Innovation, Vision, and Creativity, and a co-founder at the Trauma Resource Institute. That is probably one of the best titles anyone has ever had.
I made it up. I made it up when I left being the executive director at the end of last year. They go, well, what do you want to call yourself? I go, well, it has to be something different. So there you go.
Perfect. Innovation, vision, and creativity.
Everything I wanted to do.
And she is the author of the book, Building Resilience to Trauma and the Trauma and Community Resilience Model. So if you don't know anything about these models have been used all over the world, 102 different countries from Asia, Africa, North America, the Mideast, South America, Europe. These are tools that people can use in dealing with trauma and being resilient and dealing with stress. Her book was selected by the United Nations to be part of their online library of tools that can be used to help meet the sustainable development goals. And she is a founding member of the International Transformation Resilience Coalition and a senior consultant at Emory University's learning program. And you have just so many wonderful accomplishments that you have done all over the world. And she is going to share about this model and 6 tools that we might be able to use.
Following what
you know, we have a group at the church known as WISE, Welcoming, Inclusive, Supportive, and Engaged on Mental Health. And we've been trying to come up with people who can share with us ways for us to cope with these 2 public health crises of racism and COVID-19, because we know that both of them have created a lot of unique stresses and anxiety for people in our community. So Elaine, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be here. I would love to share the work that we've been doing, and it's been a big we that have shared this work around the world. I'm always humbled when I think that our work has been brought to 102 countries, because that seems a little daunting to me just to even think about that. But it has happened through the Trauma Resource Institute, through Loma Linda University that we've had a partnership with for many years. It's happened through the social, emotional, and ethical learning program that's through Emory University that was inspired by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I had the honor to meet him in India a year ago, April. So it's been something that you don't know what's gonna happen from little seedlings that are started. And I see that Susan Leminska and Jack Mills are on the phone, and I have much gratitude to Susan Leminska, who connected me to Arrowhead Regional Medical Center many years ago, where I became a teacher of family medicine. And I want to say that because if it wasn't for that, connection and bridge, I might not be talking to you about that, because we had a wonderful chairperson of our department, Emily Ebert. Someone has their phone continued to be, they should put it on mute because I'm hearing some ambient conversation. Okay, great, thank you. So in any event, Emily Ebert, who really was inspiring to me, she was the chairman of the department and really treated all of us with not only equality, but I felt equity, because I was a social worker, and she actually gave the same funding for the social workers she did for the doctors to get continuing education credits. And I say that because part of her generosity led me to many kinds of trainings that led me to you today. So to start out with that, I want to bring up a PowerPoint. And I also, we have just, I'm so glad we have 27 people. This is lovely. That I want to invite you to put questions in the chat. And I'm wondering, Pastor Jacob, if you see, could you monitor the chat for me? And if there's questions that come up, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question if you think it's pertinent, because I just really find the chat as being a wonderful way for us to, communicate. So I'm going to share the screen right now, and I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint that I prepared for today. And we'll get started. So I'm calling it this Cultivating Our Best Selves in response to COVID and the social unrest that we're experiencing around the world. When I say I've spoken to so many people, I think close to 5,000 over the last 2.5 months, a lot of it has been as a result of COVID, but then it's also been regarding the social unrest. In our organization, we have a equity, diversity, and inclusion committee that's been working very hard over the last 4 years. And we bring forth programs within our organization that talk about the dialogue that needs to happen amongst all of us, and how if we learn simple skills, and you're going to know what this means as we go through this little teaching I'm going to do today, sharing with you, is that when we learn to regulate our nervous system, that it can bring us to the better parts of ourselves so that we can respond to what's happening in the world with hopefully compassion, and with the ideas of equity and equality being interspersed with everything that we're doing. So I'm going to ask you to begin with these are called resiliency questions. And with all the strife that we've been having right now, I'm going to ask you, what or who is helping you the most right now? What or who is giving you strength? What or who has helped you get through hard times in the past, or what is helping you now, if anything? And I'm going to invite you to put the answers to either one or all of the questions into the chat. And I'm wondering if there's, I'm going to just bring up the chat and see what people are putting in, if anything. So my friends and family, finding good, reliable information so I can try to make sense in my own way, in my own situation. Family, reminding myself to keep a positive outlook, connecting with my friends online, reading, feeding the mind and spirit, closest friends, my church, connection with friends, phone calls with friends help me, and online trauma support groups, my spouse, meditation, Zooming with friends and family, the New York Times. I like the New York Times too, Jack. That helps me right now as well. I like the op-eds. Yeah, so we can see as I'm gonna put what has helped me, helps me a lot right now, is my granddaughter, who has been here to visit me because they've been social distancing as well. Her name is Madison, and that certainly gives me a lot of joy. My faith, friends, family, positive podcasts, meditation, my daughter's meditation, prayer work. So, as you're hearing me list what your community is saying, daily calls, faith in God and knowing God's grace makes all things possible. It's just even, I'm going to invite you to do this a little bit later, but notice if anything happens inside of you. Do you notice a deeper breath? Do you notice the relaxation of your muscles? Staying connected with CUCC. Just kind of take a little peek in and see if, as we have our own answers to that question, but also see the answers of others, what happens inside of us. That is called reading your nervous system. It's called tracking. And we're going to talk more about that because that's an essential part of how we help people to come forth at their best selves. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So we call that a resiliency pause because it can help us bring us back to a balanced state in mind and body. And during this pandemic, and also with the social unrest, I think it's important to remember what else is true about who we are as human beings and how we show up in the world collectively as community, which knowing UCC has done that in all my years of association with the church. So for a moment, I'm going to ask you to pause for just a minute again, and just to remember your answers to one of those resiliency questions. I just noticed a deeper breath as I brought my mind to those again. So I'm going to let you know, I'm going to be talking to you about the Community Resiliency Model. So in our organization, we have two models, the Trauma Resiliency Model and the Community Resiliency Model. And the Community Resiliency Model grew out of the other model. And that really came to be really partly by being at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center and co-attending with the medical faculty at our health clinic in Fontana. And it also came with the work I was doing internationally in Haiti and in Thailand after the tsunami. And what I saw that people were having so much suffering, and many times the people who would show up for the clinics and Susan Leminska knows this well, they would be complaining about, oh, my headaches, my stomach ache. They would report a lot of distress in their body. And they'd come to the doctor or the nurse practitioner and they would want to have what's going on. Maybe I have a brain tumor, maybe something, is going on with my body. And what would happen would be that it was really about the trauma in their lives. It would be about the stress in their lives. So when I was in Haiti, and I was in a country where the mental health needs were so great, but I was in the Central Plateau, and there was one psychologist for like 60,000 people. How could one psychologist possibly meet the health needs? But what I saw in Haiti and also saw in San Bernardino County is that there were many natural leaders that didn't have a degree, but had so much wisdom that they were the go-to persons in their communities if people were suffering. When you have limited resources, you go to where people can support you. So that came up with the idea, what if we train the natural leaders of communities to be community resiliency model teachers, to teach the wellness skills of this community resiliency model? And how could that possibly change not only ourselves, because we want to put that oxygen mask on first, but how could that also change our families? How could that change our community? So what we've seen with the community resiliency model, which is simply a set of 6 wellness skills, and I'm going to try to teach you 3 today in the short time I have. You can use them across the lifespan. I teach pregnant moms. We can teach moms and caregivers of small children. Someone sent me a tape of a 3-year-old teaching her 1.5-year-old brother one of the skills. So it can be used across the lifespan. It can be used across cultures. We have been, as 102 countries. We all have a nervous system, whether we live in Tanzania or Northern Ireland or the United States, Claremont, California, Los Angeles County, San Bernardino County, and it reacts in similar ways. And I'll explain more of that in just a minute. But we've also worked with people with such a variety of literacy levels. Certainly in Haiti, it wasn't that people weren't smart. They didn't have the advantage of education in the Central Plateau like they did in other areas. Some people did, but some people didn't. But we also work with small children who don't yet have the ability to read, but they can read their nervous systems because we have a developing nervous system from the womb. So we all have the access to the language of our biology and a framework to help understand the human experience, which really is a bedrock and foundation of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Well, that was it's 103 countries now because Australia just came on board, but it used to be 102. But I want to start with creating a common language. This is really basic. I teach this everywhere. If I can teach nothing else and the skills, I teach this next part. And that is we all have a zone within us. We call it the resilient zone, the okay zone. All of our materials are translated into, I think we have 17 languages now, but in Spanish, it's called La Zona de Bienestar. And this is the place where we're at our best selves. And notice that it's not a flat line. You may wake up in the morning, let's say you have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you're feeling pretty good. And let's say you happen to read the news or hear something on the television that disturbs you. So you're still within your zone, but you're a bit distressed. So you get a little higher. And then let's say that, you do one of your answers to your resiliency questions. You say a prayer, you talk to one of your family members, and you're feeling that rhythm come in, and you're feeling a little bit better. So there's a charge and release that happens throughout our day. And that's also, and it doesn't mean that we don't feel sad in this resilient zone. We can, because sadness is a normal human emotion. We could feel sad, we can even be angry, but we're not so angry that we've lost our ability to think. And people have asked me this all over the world, but I have to be angry about what's happening at the Syrian border to the Syrian refugees. This was someone in Turkey when I was in Turkey a few years ago. And I'm not saying, because I know that many people at UCC they're very passionate about what's happening in the world in terms of being advocates. It's that we can advocate with our passion when we're within our resilient zone, and we can have that kind of passion that comes with commitment and maybe have a bit of anger, but not so angry that we're outside of our zone. And that's the next part. And here you can see we just did it with emojis, but here's your okay zone. But if we get really, really angry, we can get stuck in what we call the high zone. You can see the emoji faces, and we're angry, we're upset. we're yelling, and sometimes, I mean, some of you maybe have been in this zone, I certainly have, where you go, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. You regret what you say, you sometimes regret your actions. And so it happens often without thinking, but then you only can stay in that high zone so long before you dive into that low zone. Low zone is disconnected, depressed. I don't want to get out of bed. I just feel like, oh my, sometimes we even have thoughts I'm worthless, and we may go between the high and the low zone. Now, I'm just going to get a show of hands if you want to, if those of you that are online, or you can put in the chat, have anybody besides you besides me been in the high zone? You can raise your hand. How about in the low zone? Yes. How about both? So I think Pastor Jacob and I we're related. I can't see the rest of you, but I've asked that question all over the world, and the answer is the same. So this is the way that we describe human behavior. And this takes out the negativity. Oh, there I'm saying people have said both, yes. And most people have been in both in my experience, and I know that I tend to run high, that I tend to go into my high zone more than my low zone. And some people are just the opposite. So we explain this model to children. That's the C Learning program with His Holiness the Dalai Lama is about how we're bringing this to the world's children, is chapter 2 of a very wonderful curriculum that, by the way, is completely free, that you could go to today and sign up for. But I think if you look at it this way too, it takes the kind of like the judgment out of behavior. And we're trying to change the paradigm to say, you're not a bad person. You have, you have a biological process that gets manifested in these different zones. So there's not pathology involved in it. There's not mental weakness. It's your biology. And that's one of our mantras in the organization. So
Elaine, we had a hand go up.
Yes. Go ahead,
You
question.
Ask your question.
I'm not hearing the question.
Trina, did you have a question?
No, she
was
said
just saying both.
Of her high.
Yeah.
She was saying she had been the high zone. Okay.
Got it.
All right. So the model is based in science. It's based on beginning to learn how to read your autonomic nervous system. And so like right now, many of you are sitting in chairs, and if you don't have any disability from doing this, I'm going to ask you, as you're sitting in your chair, you can stand up if you want, to start moving your body really fast, like me. Move it really fast. Fast, really fast. Fast. All right, you can stop. So you might notice that your heartbeat is a little bit faster, that your breathing is a little bit faster. And so what we just did is we activated your sympathetic nervous system. It prepares us for action. And so as you can see with the graphic, your breathing rate may be a little bit faster. You don't have a blood pressure cuff on, but if you stay there long enough, your blood pressure is going to go up. But during those times of sympathetic action, we don't need our digestion and our saliva. So sometimes we even get dry mouth if we stay up there too long, and our digestion slows down. But what we try to do is to know when we're in that state, because some of us, and I know I have been more so in the last 3 months, I've noticed myself more getting bumped up, like seeing a news program and going, oh, I can't believe this is happening. And so if we stayed up there too long, that's not good for us, because we know that can affect our immune system. So it's very important for us to pay attention to how we access the parasympathetic nervous system that prepares us for rest. And that was one of the things that happened for some of you when I asked those resiliency questions in the beginning. Some of you may have noticed a deeper breath. You may have noticed your muscles relax. So what we're inviting you to do and to think about with this presentation is to become more aware of your internal sensations, because if you're stuck in that high zone for too long, it's not good for you. What can you do with intention to bring yourself into a parasympathetic response? So that's the very simple definition of this model. And so I'm going to go through this next section rather quickly because I want to get to the skills. But this is what many of us, and you may take a peek at this, I kind of put this together when we were getting so many questions about what was happening after the pandemic. And people were talking about, their fears, the job layoffs, their grief, financial, housing, and food insecurity, wondering if they lose their jobs, how are they going to feed their children? that their social networks were disrupted when they saw somebody every single day. Now, some of us have replaced that with Zoom and social distancing events with a very small gathering, less than 10, but that still is something that many of us, I'm over 65, so I've got this one down there, fear of catching the virus, because I know I have some conditions that could be at greater risk for having more serious outcomes. But I think the other thing I've heard from many is fear of spreading the virus to loved ones. And one that I should put on here that I didn't is I've heard a lot of fears of dying alone if you were to get the virus and have some of the effects. Anxiety about the unknown, what's going to happen in the future, and stigma and polarization. And stigma being, many of my Asian American friends have told me about really awful things being said to them because of people coming up to them and saying, you brought this to our country, which of course is a divisiveness that many of us work very hard to avoid. But that's why I think reaching out to our friends of color, our friends who represent different ethnic groups who may be experiencing more hardship right now. And then the polarization, and I've seen this in my own family, but I have one child who is a big social distancer and the other one that believes in herd mentality. And I have to tell you, the two of them were at the house 6 feet apart having a very heated conversation. And I have to say, it's not pleasant if that happens in your family. It's certainly not pleasant for me, but knowing that it exists and I love my children and yet have to deal with these kind of disparities. And I think we also see the polarization in our country, where some of us who believe in science, which I do, and I wear my mask, and all those kinds of things, to see others who don't, it has a reaction in me, as well as a reaction for people who believe not to wear masks. So I'm sure some of you have had some similar experiences with this. And then, anyone who's had a chronic mental health condition, and now is facing being alone more, maybe being isolated, of course, that's going to exacerbate their condition. And so this is another reason why learning simple regulation skills like the community resiliency model can really be helpful for people. Now, I know there's things that I haven't included on here. And if any of you say, oh, Len, you didn't put this in, please feel free to put in the chat anything in addition that you think is also important to highlight that people need to be aware of that you may have in your own personal experience. And as you may want to do that, I'm going to move forward, because I also wanted to talk about this right now in just a brief way. We don't have the time that I would like to take. Maybe they'll invite me back. But the human toll, because of the multiple experiences of discrimination and racism. And there's this historical trauma of, if you came here because of slavery, and the wake of that's been going on for hundreds of years. But our native people, I mean, that's just to name two, but there's historical trauma that also some people call intergenerational trauma. We know that it can change our genomes, that it's real. There is structural and institutional trauma. And when I talk about these two subjects, I mean, these are things that were made long before any of us were born. They were embedded in sometimes the very inception of this country. But we're dealing with the repercussions right now. And I think the horror for I think most of us seeing the murder of George Floyd and the amplification of all the people of color who've been killed is bringing this to the forefront right now. And as much as this is horrible, I always try to see that light in the crack and hoping that maybe there'll be more change that may happen. And that certainly is my hope. And I know UCC works very hard with that. But I think there's also the chronic discrimination where, the microaggressions and the macroaggressions that people may deal with every day. And that plays a toll. There's research that shows that does affect our immune system. And then there's recent incidents. There's people looking at you in different ways. There's the different things that happen in the lived experience of the now that can add to, to this pot of dysregulation within us, which is why we work very hard to say, if there's times that you feel safer, try to bring your nervous system back into balance. Our nervous system does respond in ways that are important when we are under threat. Now, this is the common reactions, and I'm going to just have you look at it really quickly. I'm not going to read everything on here, but it's really important. These are some of the 6 domains of human experience. I've asked the same questions all over the world in every country I've gone to. I asked people, what has changed in your thinking and the way that you feel physically, your spiritual beliefs, emotions, relationships, and behaviors since the event happened or during the event. And these are the common things that people tell me. And this is not an exhaustive list, but for example, the physical, which is in the center, many people have these physical problems and they're thinking, oh my God, I have cancer. And so many times they never even go to a mental health professional. They go to a nurse practitioner or a family physician who hopefully is versed in how to deal with the mind and body, which some are better versed than others. But this is why it's important for us to take it, the mental health, to take it into the realm of mind-body health, because I think only then can we really tackle this issue and be the most effective, and also think about a cadre of peer-to-peer support individuals, the natural leaders that can bring this forward. So here we have the other side of the coin, because I've also asked all over the world, what has been the learned experience from these lived experiences of sometimes trauma, horror. And these are some of the things. Certainly I could probably have 10 slides and I couldn't put them all in, but sometimes having more strength and courage, coming together with a joint purpose. I certainly have seen that with the political protests that have been happening. Increased gratitude, being a strong advocate for something that you really believe in because you've had a personal experience. Your appreciation of loved ones, hope and faith, wisdom, compassion for self and others. So I'm going to ask you again, if you'd like to put into the chat, what have you seen in yourself or others that have been about well-being that's happened because of some of the suffering that you or others may have experienced? I'm just going to ask you to put that in the chat again. And as you maybe even see the words that we've written here, is there one that especially calls to you? And if there is, I'm going to just invite you to kind of just look at that word. Or if it's another word that's more important to you, think about that word and just pay attention to what happens to you in mind, body, and spirit as you bring that word up. So I'm seeing more of a focus on being happy for simple things, more open-mindedness that I would expect from some, finding ways to help others, strength and courage, coming together, listening, compassion for self. Yes, Harry, that's one I'm hearing more and more of. Yeah, compassion for self. Thank you for sharing. See, compassion for each other within our family bubble with 5 of us living together. Yes, that could be lots of compassion, Laura. Increased gratitude, advocacy opportunities through Zoom, creative solutions. Wow. All these are, we could add, again, adding to this list. All right, I'm going to move forward now, and I'm just going to talk about the key concepts of the model. Besides the resiliency zones, is that we focus on the biology of the human nervous system. There are common human reactions that we just talked about to stressful and traumatic events. And what we've learned, and this is one of the most important things I'm going to say to you, is that CRIM helps individuals learn to read their nervous systems, to return to their zone of well-being, called the resilient zone, through the use of simple wellness skills, and most importantly, to learn to tell the difference between sensations of distress and sensations of well-being. So the model is based on the laws of nature. And so then there's natural, rhythms in nature for today. And in my part of Claremont, it's pretty cloudy and overcast. Yesterday, there was a lot of sunshine. We had wind yesterday in the afternoon. Right now, it's very still. So those kinds of rhythms that are in nature also exist when inside of us. And some of us who've had a lot of trauma and stress, we can feel like the discomfort and pain will never go away. And what we've learned that when we work with these simple skills, that it can be a very actually helpful intervention that can change the way that we experience ourselves internally, and also then leads to what Harry said back there, increased compassion for self. And that's been one of the most amazing things that I've seen all over the world. It's also based on neuroplasticity. The brain can change. So we know that no matter how much pain and suffering that you've had, and that pathway can be well laid down, that you can develop new pathways within your mind and your body. And because there's also the process of neurogenesis, which is the ability to create new neurons or brain cells throughout our lifetime. And this is one of the reasons coming into this particular lens is bringing the lens of the community resiliency model to create safer spaces for dialogue regarding our differences, honoring our lived experiences, and remembering what binds us as a community. When I talk about these common reactions that happen to all of us, that can also be a starting point of being together as a community. And many of us, I can see on the call, we've been around the block a few times. We've seen when that sort of thing has happened. But I think the other thing that I want you all to know about is that our organization really is embedded with core values of service, social justice, dignity, respect, and the worth of every person, family, and community. And that is what we try to do as we go around the world. And why a biological intervention? I know many of you are interested in mental health. You know, we learned in the end of the 90s, there was a study done by Dr. Folletti and Anda through the Kaiser Permanente system. Some of you may know about it, but they found that if you had this, number one here are the adverse child experiences that were in their original study, that if you had 4 or more of these adverse child experiences, that your chances of having diabetes, chronic pulmonary disease, hypertension, went up to such a higher degree compared to those who had 0. If you had 6 or more, your likelihood of your life expectancy was 20 years shorter compared to those who had 0. So basically this started a public health emergency in the country, saying we need to have a conversation about adverse child experiences and how do we change this to create healthier communities. And so over the years, and I'm very involved with ACEs Connection, which is a national organization. They've added the second category, which is violence, poverty, racism. And then the third is the climate crisis. And we can add the pandemic to environmental stressors that can impact children and what that means for their future. So it's really important for all of us that have kids right now to also think about their well-being and how do we help them learn to regulate their little nervous systems. So that comes to the skills. And I have a few, I think I can do this. I have to end at 5 to 10, is that right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so I can do this. All right. So first of all, if I don't do this, there's an iChill app, and you can see with iChill, we have all of our skills. It's a free app, and we have it in English and in Spanish. So that is something that I hope that you will think about downloading to reinforce the skills I'm going to teach you today. And the first one I've already mentioned is tracking, which is the foundation for helping to stabilize the nervous system. Tracking is noticing or paying attention to sensations, to what is happening inside the body in the present moment. And we have these different portals of how we have established our mental health over the years. A lot of the Western models have been thinking models, like cognitive behavioral therapy, that I know Rick Rogers is very well versed in. It's a very helpful intervention, but it's only part of the equation. So, you know, if we think differently, we'll feel differently, it will cause an impact. We also have many models that are about emotive therapies. What are we feeling? And of course, it's very important to express our feelings. But one of the doorways, and you can see there's 3 doorways here we've left out, is the sensing. What are we sensing? Which is, I've already asked you that a few times. And for many of us, especially right now, if we are locked in fear, we can say, or really anxious in that high zone, we can say, stop being anxious, Elaine. That doesn't necessarily take the anxiety away. But if I sit here and I do one of the skills, I'm doing one right now, it's called grounding. I'm bringing my attention to the present moment, putting my hand on the table, which is my way to ground, through my right hand usually. I immediately come back into my zone. And so some of the skills are so simple. Again, even children can learn them, but it's using our sensory system as another form of evaluating what's happening to us. And I think this is what makes the community resiliency model different from anything else that many people have learned. And it's even different from mindfulness practice, because mindfulness practice says, pay attention. So even if the distress is there, it's having you to continue to watch the distress. What we do is we shift away and we ask what else is true in the body. So you might have distress, let's say, in your shoulders, but I'll say, well, is there any place in your body that you're not feeling distress? And I've had people say, my nose. I go, well, what happens if you just even touch your nose and bring your attention there? And a person will all of a sudden go, they take a deeper breath. And they're so surprised to see that some of the tension in their shoulders leave. So you'll have to try that. You'll have to see that for yourself, because the model is based on the idea of what we pay attention to grows. So if, we have lots of beautiful gardens in Claremont, and we also have weeds, but what would happen if you only watered the weeds in your garden? And some of the models of intervention for mental health have been focused on, let's talk about your weeds, let's get you to emote and to think differently about it, and then that will change you. Well, that only does part of the picture. But what if you were able to sense your well-being and really pay attention to that, like pouring water on the flowers of your garden? Or what someone said to me recently, well, the flowers are too much, but I can pour water on the grass. Like, okay, that's fine. So noticing that shift inside of us, and this is also based on neuroscience. And this is a very fancy theory called Hebbian Theory. Carla Schatz is from Harvard, and she distilled this very dense theory into brain cells that fire together, wire together. So what you pay attention to grows, not only in your garden, but in your own body. And even though you may have felt that there's so much distress in your body, that doesn't mean that it can't shift. And that's what we've seen all over the world. And I put this one in for you guys especially, because this is neurosection. That's the fancy scientific word for tracking. And you already do this. So like if it's really, really hot in Claremont, which sometimes it is, will you just stay in the heat and get really, really hot? What will you do? I imagine some of you will be like me. You'll go into the shade, or you'll go inside to the air conditioning. If you have air conditioning, go, oh, I feel much better. That's reading your nervous system. And so it comes, it's from a part of the brain in the center called the insula. And this is the part of the brain, like if you have an itch, you itch, right? You scratch. So your brain is telling you that something's happening to your body because you have billions of receptors all over your body telling you different things. And so what they're learning about this, which is so exciting, because it's what I've been seeing in the field for the last 20 years, and they're now having research to back it up, is that body awareness can reduce impulsivity and promote emotion regulation and clearer thinking. This comes from Dr. Martin Paulus, who's a researcher at UC San Diego on interoception. And so what's that? So that means that even those of us that can feel, I'll never get a handle on this, that we can actually start to experience our emotions in a different way. Now, I want to also, because I want Susan to know this, Susan Levinska, I want you to know Lindy Grabby is a psychiatric nurse practitioner from Emory, and she just published our first randomized controlled trial on nurses. Many of them were psychiatric nurse practitioners and nurse practitioners because she teaches in the nursing program. But the study that she did was a 3-hour program teaching the skills that I'm going to teach you in just a second. And she looked at the nurses pre and post, and after 1 year, they had an 80% improvement in well-being. She just did a talk to the Association of Nurse Practitioners regarding the model. She's just a big proponent of it and hoping to bring it to nursing in a larger way. So here is a study, and I'm going to just go through this really. What I want you to know is the most important part of this study is that every thought, feeling, and a belief has a corresponding sensation in the body. We sometimes don't even know the feeling, but we'll know the sensation before we know the feeling. And that every time that we can tell the difference between distress and then well-being, we also have a choice that comes in that we can have for ourselves. Sometimes our life experience has not resulted in choice. If we were sexually abused as kids, if we grew up in a violent home, that was not our choice. But when we start to cultivate this well-being, it can grow. So how do we do this? I'm going to invite you to do something right now. Just put your hands together and to rub your hands slowly first, and then faster and faster. And then notice what happens as you go really fast. Like my hands feel heat. Anybody else feel heat? Okay, I imagine you do. Now I'm going to ask you to slow down and see, is it cooling down? So that's temperature change, right? You could tell the difference between heat and cooling down. So what we pay attention to, like I said, grows. So we want to find out whether or not, was it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral when your hands were hot? Maybe for some of you it was pleasant, others it was unpleasant, or maybe it didn't really have any Any weight, maybe it was just neutral. So we asked the questions, what do you notice on the inside? And are the sensations pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So that is tracking. And so the best way to learn how to track to begin with, and I'm going to invite you all to do this in just a second, is to think about skill number 2, which is a resource. And that can be anything. It can be a person, a place, a thing. It can be your faith. It can be all the things you've already put into the box about, your daughters, the different things, your family. What is it that brings you calm? Maybe makes you feel more pleasant on the inside, or peaceful, strong, or resilient. And it can be real or imagined. Like this picture, my granddaughter Madison is one of them, because I made the slide deck, I put her in there. But maybe it's a person. Sometimes it can be your favorite stuffed animal. We have a school in West LA that they just sent me a little thing of the kids talking. They're at home, and what they did is they brought out their resource. And one little boy was like, had his little blankie. Another little boy had some stuffed animals. Another little boy was just thrown over his dog. And as he touched and petted his dog, he talked about the sensations inside of his body. So it can be internal or external. It can be, your compassion. I know some people, for example, Rick Rogers is a very compassionate man. I've seen his compassion in action as a psychologist. I've also had the benefit of seeing Susan Leminska, having worked with her, how kind she was to her patients. Those internal qualities that you might like about yourself. So for just, a moment, I would like to invite you to think about one of your personal resources. It's important not just to think about it. Like if I was to say my granddaughter, Madison, I have an immediate reaction. Look at my hand to my heart, which is a universal gesture. But I think about her spunk. I think about her saying, Nana, do you miss me? Or I think about her wanting to do experiments, science experiments with me in the backyard. We just did one where we excavated stones out of a thing that I got from National Geographic. And when I think about her, that just widens it. It's like those old taffy machines. I can feel it all over my body, my absolute love for her. And it's really a sensation of warmth, and I can sense a deeper breath. I don't know if you noticed my shoulders just relaxed a little bit. And that wasn't an intentional breath. It just came as I thought about her. So as you think about your resource and those 3 qualities, is try to see if you can notice the sensations connected to it. And also to know that sometimes when we think about our resource, we can also sometimes have tears. They can be gratitude tears, or sometimes they can be tinged with a little sadness. But that doesn't make the resource less of a resource. Like I could think about my father-in-law. He lived to be 105. He died last September. There were so many great qualities about him, and yet we miss him. So then I'm going to ask you, as you do that, if you would like to share, and this is always an invitation, of what your resource is. And also, if you notice sensations connected to that resource. I'll start by putting my granddaughter in. So I'm going to invite anybody else who would like to do that. Someone just mentioned a beach. Pet, cat, soft petting, relaxation. Oh, my husband, who will listen to me in the middle of the night when I can't sleep. Yeah. See if anyone else wants to share a resource. Mom-centered, focused, less fear. Grandchildren, joy and relaxation. You know, I've asked these questions all over the world. You know, it's also, to me, what binds us as human beings. Many people will talk about their families. I think there's family, their faith, and their animals are some of the common things, or sometimes things in nature as well. We'll see over and over again. My dog makes me laugh. Take a breath, slows me down. So all these resources, and the reason why it's important to call in your sensations is because that's what we think helps to really make those new pathways, those cellular pathways within the body. It's like when you're working a word program and you may have written something really beautiful, but you forgot to save it. And even though you might call it up again, it may not be just quite exacting as what you wrote in the beginning. So this is like saving this to your hard drive, is bringing it to sensation. And I have to tell you, we have so many places, universities around the world right now, including the University of Kigali in Rwanda. We have a wonderful group of 17 young people there that are teaching. Sam Habimana is their leader, and they're in the process of having one of their publications about how this has really helped with people who've survived the genocide. So if you have kiddos, I put this in for those of you who have children, you know, ask them the resource-oriented questions. You know, sometimes, someone told me with their teenagers, they go, I just ask them, what in your life doesn't suck right now? So that might not be what I would ask someone that was older, but that might be the language of your teenager. You know, who's your favorite pet, friend? If your children use social media, ask them to show you their favorite picture that they've saved. Most of them have a favorite picture that they've taken. You know, what's their favorite activity? Who is, you know, their favorite character in a book? You know, you can have a resource booklet that you can turn to and to remind us what else is true when things are getting a little snarly at home. There's a whole other set of things for children that also I want to let you know that if you go to our website, we did a 4-part series. It's called the Family Resiliency Program, through the lens of the Community Resiliency Program. And it's on our website if you want more information about things like this. Okay, so now that's resourcing. And thank you all for those of you who put things in the chat. This is and I can do this in less than 5 minutes. I just want to talk a little bit about grounding, because grounding is also really important right now, because sometimes with everything that's happening in the world, and I've really heard this since COVID, sometimes we can feel like maybe our feet are on the ground, but like the rest of us we're spinning. And it's called gravitational security, and that sense of ourselves in the present moment. And it's very important for us to try to get there if we're not there. And so if our relationship to the earth is not safe, then all of the other relationships do not develop optimally. And there's certainly there's many reasons for some of us to feel unsafe right now. So if you can have moments, maybe it's in your home, maybe it's when you're in the shower. I know someone who says, Elaine, I know this sounds weird, but I go into my closet because it's dark, I close the door and I meditate and I really notice I'm present in that moment. Well, whatever it might be for you, it's very important for you to bring attention to how you may feel better in mind, body, and spirit when you're in the present moment, because then you're not worried about what's happening out there or in the back. You're just right here with yourself and doing what you need to negotiate for the present moment. So we can ground in many different ways. Sometimes people think you just have to ground through your feet. That's not true. People ground sometimes by walking. I heard someone walking in the botanical gardens. So you're seeing beauty, but if you pay attention to each step, that's also a way to bring yourself to the present moment, which sometimes walking in a beautiful place does. Lying down on a surface, floating in water. Some people can't ground in a chair, but they can ground if they're leaning against a wall and looking out at the perimeter. That makes them feel safer. So, or you can see with the big hand in the foot, I ground through my right hand. So it doesn't have to be the entire body. So what I'd like to do just in the few moments that we have left is I want to just take you through a very brief grounding exercise where you just try to find a comfortable position in any different ways that I've just suggested. And just try to see what happens when you bring your attention to how whatever surface you're either sitting in, laying on, or next to is making contact with your body. And as you notice how your body's making contact, see if there's a part of your body that feels more comfortable than another part. And if you can draw your attention to the part of your body that feels neutral or more comfortable, and just hang there for a few moments. And just see if it's comfortable for you to notice what happens to your breathing. Even some of you may notice your heart rate changing or not. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Just take a few minutes to notice sensations that are more comfortable or neutral. So just take a moment more. And as you come back to our Zoom room, maybe softening your gaze, kind of want to end with this just little hand. And this hand is an easy way to remember our skills. I've only taught you a couple, but you can learn the rest on the iChill app. But tracking is in the center of the palm because we do that with everything. So I just taught you resourcing and grounding. There's 3 others that I haven't taught you, but you can learn about them at the app, or maybe Pastor Jacob will have me come back again for part 2.
That would be wonderful.
All right. And this is my final slide. How am I focusing my attention during the pandemic and this time of unrest? You know, there are things that go along and thoughts that go along with the high and low zones that I talked about earlier. You know, we can complain, seek to blame others, disconnect, can have problems sleeping. We can sometimes seek to control people or events to feel safer. I'm not going to name everything, but how do we move to that resilient zone? We can identify your resources and track. You can focus on sensations of well-being. You can identify sensations connected to your emotions and thoughts. And if you're in the high or low zone, you might try the Help Now strategy. And that's your homework assignment. Go to that app and see what the Help Now strategies are, because they can really be helpful, especially for children. And then finally, if we're able to do that, I'm going to invite you to look at the blue circle. That when we're in our resilient zone, and I've seen this all over the world, even after the worst horrors, people have more compassion for themselves and others, which I think is what we need in this world right now with the pandemic and with the social unrest. I see people reaching out to others. People, you know, are more focused on their gratitudes and sometimes on their advocacy. So this is our hope when we look at the trajectory of how we can be and how we can choose to move forward in a different way. And as I end too, I want you all to know that, you know, I think for many of us, if we felt bad, I've talked to so many people around the world, that people are getting knocked more in their high and low zone everywhere. And so it's something to maybe think about being compassionate towards yourself. We're living in very unprecedented times, but there are ways that we can come back into that place of a stronger sense of self, and then be the people we want to be and be the advocates we want to be in the world. And I'm so happy to say that our model is demonstrating that people have statistically significant reductions in depression and anxiety and hostility indicators and improvements in well-being when they learn these simple skills. And we now have a lot of evidence. When I started, it was with a song and a prayer, right? but now it's really expanded into place. And I want to just also say, many of you know Joyce Kirkmore. Joyce has been a great supporter of me personally and of the Trauma Resource Institute, and was on our board for a while during some hard times and helped us through a difficult period. So always want to call out to her and my care and love for her. So, so anyway, that's all I mean, there's so much more, Pastor Jacob, but this is a kind of an appetizer of what might be helpful for you and what we're doing in the world.
Yeah, a lot of great tools. And I thought it was personally inspiring to see how coming back into that resiliency zone can make us better people and better advocates, because we have a stronger sense of who we are and our own place in the world. So I hope this is helpful for everyone. And we will put this recording up so you can rewatch it. And thank you for the iChill app recommendation.
And if if you want to, I could send you a PDF of the PowerPoint.
That'd be great.
And I'd be happy for you to share it with everyone. It also has the research and also the places where people could go and read. There was just another publication in the International Journal of Mental Health and Addiction that was also published by Dr. Grabby. So that's another resource, especially since this group, I understand, is focused on mental health.
Thank you, Elaine. We would love to have you back. We appreciate your time with us. Everyone can give her a digital round of applause. We will.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks for all this, and thank you for all the sweet little messages. Also, I just want to say is check out C Learning. It's completely free. It has curriculum from kindergarten now all the way through, going to be all through high school. It's in so many different languages. It is completely free. So check it out, because those of you that are at home with your kids, you can learn some really simple ways of the whole focus of it is how to bring more compassion and ethics to our world children.